There is no such a person like Elon Musk in the Biden administration. And maybe because of that, President Joe Biden was the only president that did not visit China. China can be America's best friend or worst enemy. At the moment, President Trump has taken the first step to reach out to China. In his inauguration speech, President Trump focused on domestic challenges while giving only lip service to foreign policy issues. Foreign policy is perhaps an area where President Trump could achieve some quick and visible gains. So his foreign policy priority can be summarized as what I see as the 3 T's: tariff, territory, and terminating or ending the Ukraine war. Tariff, for example, may generate some quick pocket money, but not without pains. It will for sure add pressure to already high inflation for many poor and middle class Americans. It may not lead to eventual import substitution. This is because the US lacks engineers and skilled workers, and it takes decades to train them. Even the US military finds itself highly dependent on China's supply chains. So President Trump, therefore, will have to navigate carefully in a trade war, which is usually produce only losers to various degrees. As to the second T, which is about territory, Trump had repeatedly voiced his desire for land acquisition, Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal. Given the huge power disparities between the US and these smaller and weaker states, the US indeed has the power to prevail. That's no question. The question is whether the US has the authority or the legitimacy to take land from others in such a forceful manner. The third T, which is how to terminate or end the Ukraine war. On the campaign trail, Trump promised many times to end the war in 24 hours. Ending the war or any war, not just the Ukraine war, could be far more difficult than starting one, according to Henry Kissinger's 2014 article on the Washington Post on the Crimea crisis. For him, I quote, "The test of policy is how it ends, not how it begins," unquote. Regardless, ending the bloody war in Ukraine is now on the agenda. If this war-ending effort would lead to some kind of de-escalation, conflict management, a ceasefire, or even a long-term peace, the 47th President of the United States deserves serious consideration for a Nobel Peace Prize. At least that would be far more credible than the 2009 Nobel Peace Prize for Barack Obama. Finally, I want to say that of all 3 T's of President Trump's foreign policy priority, China is a ubiquitous factor behind all of them in the minds of and the rhetoric of Trump. But China can be America's best friend or worst enemy. At the moment, President Trump has taken the first step to reach out to China, as he indicated to visit China in his first 100 days as US president. Also, one recalls a US-China honeymoon, I quote, in Mar-a-Lago, first in April and then in Beijing in November 2017. It did not last long and was quickly replaced by trade wars and finger-pointing across the Pacific during the COVID times. What I hoped is that the two sides will be more realistic about this unfolding second honeymoon between the same heads of state, so that they can escape the familiar love-hate oscillation and to build bilateral ties on a normal, more pragmatic, and more durable basis. The entire TikTok issue has been a turnaround, and with lots of surprises. The angry refugees flocked the Chinese Little Red Book, totally Chinese platform, and they found China is very different from what it is portrayed by the mainstream media in America and in the atmosphere around the world. China is not as bad, as evil as the mainstream media and the politicians talk about. There is a growing, and I would say a very high level of securitization of everything regarding China. China has become a symbol of evilness, to the dismay and surprise, dismay, and anger of many users. And in a society who championed rule of law and freedom of speech, this is an unprecedented move by the political elite. And I think at the expense of the interests of tens of millions of Americans on the ground of the so-called national security. But at the minimum, President Trump authorized with the executive order to let tick out for another 60 or 90 days until acceptable result can be worked out by the two sides. The 50% ownership, I'm not quite sure. I think maybe the ownership of TikTok perhaps is close to 50% already. I think this is really a test of the beginning of a relatively normal and a good relationship. I hope that the way can be found out. And maybe it can be worked out in Trump's official visit to China in the first 100 days. Let me point to another interesting comparison. During the inauguration of President Joe Biden, Taiwan's representatives were invited, but not the Chinese official representatives. Now, this time, Chinese Vice President Han Zheng was in Washington representing President Xi Jinping, while Taiwan representative was sitting out without being able to join the inner circle. So I think this time the two sides being very careful, and particularly the U.S. side. And this is a good beginning. Taiwan actually is a non-issue currently in the minds and operation of the Trump second operation. Because if you compare the current Trump policy towards Taiwan with the first term, I would say it's very different. At the end or in the last week of his first term, Trump actually almost ignited a huge confrontation between the two sides, even if China protested again and again. It took his Joint Chief of Staff, General Milley, to call the PLA's generals, informing the Chinese side that there won't be a war. So it was a really very dangerous, close to the end of the first Trump presidency. And I think President Trump seemed to be very careful this time not to repeat this. But again, I would say anything is open, particularly if you look at the Trump's foreign policy team. There are lots of very strong pro-Taiwan figures. I have to say, this is Elon Musk represent only part of the, maybe a minority part of the national security team or cabinet and or inner circles. He knows China far more than anyone else under the Trump shadow of his cabinet. Most of them, I would say, tend to see China in less positive, more negative way. I won't be surprised to see these differences will lead to conflict of interest, inner fightings. Trump's China policy could be very bumpy, unpredictable, and even reversal. If I wouldn't be surprised. So this is something. But let me put this way: there is no such a person like Elon Musk in the Biden administration, by the way. And maybe because of that, President Joe Biden was the only president that did not visit China when he was in the White House. So this is a Guinness World Record for Joe Biden, perhaps. Even if Biden and the Chinese leaders met many times, on other occasions or on the sidelines of other multilateral meetings, but Biden became the only president. So Trump could be different, and both in his first term and his second term, already I think the high-level interactions, the process already started. And I think Vice President Han Zheng, his agenda in Washington may include, for example, how to go from here. So President Trump will be in Beijing again. I hope things can be worked out.